Hello everybody, it is June the 30th today, and there's an article yesterday that I saw on the BBC website, and then I've seen it on the TES, and it's basically some guidance from the Department for Education. They've not actually released it, I think it's been leaked, but it's basically in the press now, so I thought I'd talk through it and maybe how this is relevant for yourselves, especially if you're going to be going back to school in September. So, basically these are some plans or even kind of ideas about how schools could fully reopen, because it's not going to be identical to how it was last September because of the whole coronavirus thing. But this is what they said. No in-class social distancing, because, quite frankly, if you've got over 30 students in a normal classroom, there's no way that everybody can keep at least a metre away from everybody else. Now, the thing is, the advice is if you do have the opportunity, then you should stay over a metre away from other people. So it might be at break time, it might be coming into school, it might be when you're lining up to go into lunch. But actually, when you get into the classroom, it is pretty much impossible to keep every student a metre away from everybody else. And I suppose the way they're going to deal with this is have bubbles. So it might be have a bubble of maybe 30 people in that class, or it might be even the whole year group is one kind of big bubble. Again, this is kind of stuff which is going to develop over the coming months. So basically, if you can stay a metre apart, then do so. But other times, you're going to have to be in a class with your friends. The other thing about that is that, it says that teachers are advised to keep 2 metres away from pupils at the front of the class and keep away from colleagues as much as possible. Now, again, when I think about the schools that I've taught in and the classrooms I've been in, sometimes this is impossible. There's no way that you can stay at least, 2 metres is a long distance in a normal classroom. So I think obviously the guidance is to try and keep away from people as much as possible, but it's not always going to be possible. There's some stuff here about engagement with the NHS test and trace system. At the moment, though, this system is still in its infancy. There's no app. But I think the idea being that if somebody, maybe a student, had coronavirus symptoms, they could be isolated at school, their parents could come and pick them up and take them home, and then it might be that that whole bubble that they were in have to isolate for maybe 2 weeks, or it might be even the whole year group have to isolate for a couple of weeks. Again, stuff like that at the moment is still kind of in its infancy. But I think the thought is that if one person has coronavirus symptoms, it doesn't mean that the whole school has to completely shut down. It might just be that maybe their bubble of their friends who they've been really close to are the ones who isolate. Now, at the moment, there's just been news today about Leicester, about how they're going to extend the lockdown for Leicester in England. And I think this is probably, something that might happen, because it does say over here that there need to be contingency plans for some or all of the school being put into lockdown, and then maybe a temporary return to remote teaching, and it needs to be of high quality. Now, obviously, luckily you lot, if you're doing physics, you know that there's good resources you can trust. I've got everything laid out over at GCSE Physics online, so basically, if you want to, you can teach yourself physics. But I think there's going to have to be plans put in place by the school so that they know that you lot can actually engage with that remote learning. Because I think at the moment, a lot of people haven't actually been doing the work set by their teachers. And I'm sure that you appreciate why this is. So I think there's going to be firm kind of backup plans put in place in case schools have to shut down for a couple of weeks going forward into next year. Okay, other advice it says, no face coverings for pupils or teachers. And basically it says that they interfere with teaching and learning. Now, there's lots of good evidence that wearing a face mask stops the transmission if you're infected. It doesn't stop you getting coronavirus, but it stops you passing it on to other people if you happen to be infected. But I think the thought is that, everybody sat there with masks on for the whole lesson, and the teacher trying to present with a mask on, it just wouldn't actually, work in terms of them teaching you. So I think at the moment there's no plans that you have to wear face coverings when you're in school. But it does say that all the children need to be sat facing forward in the class. Now, the reason for this is that if one person's got coronavirus, they tend to spread it to somebody else when they're breathing out. And if they're looking at each other, if they're talking to each other, that's when as you breathe out, droplets get passed from person to person. So the idea being that you have rows in the classroom rather than kind of tables for group work. Now, I know in some classrooms this is quite easy to do. It might be easy to rearrange your English classroom or your maths classroom, especially when you've just got desks that can be moved around. But I know from teaching in loads of science labs, sometimes you have fixed labs. The benches can't move because they've got the gas supply there, they've got basins in. And sometimes they're set up in rows, but other times they're set up in clusters, which is really useful if you're doing group work and practical work. So I'm not sure how that's going to work, and maybe think back to your own school. Is it possible for all of the class to be sat facing the front rather than in your normal groups? Here it says, fines of up to £120 for parents whose children fail to attend school. Now basically this is just going back to how it normally is. If you don't go to school, and it is compulsory to go to school, then your parents can face a fine, and I think it's £60 rising to £120 if it's not paid promptly. So basically this isn't an option. It's not like if you'd like to come back to school, you can do. I think from September it's going to be back to school as normal, and therefore there's the expectation, unless you're in a medically vulnerable group, that you are going to be back in school, which to be honest is good for you because it is lonely at home and it's boring, and actually it's nice to spend time with your friends. Okay, right, here we go. This is one which is a bit controversial, and I think this is really going to depend upon your school, your teachers and yourself. And it says that some subjects for some or all pupils might be suspended for 2 terms to allow catch up on core subjects such as English and maths. Now, this would be a temporary thing. I think it'd be very hard to decide which subjects aren't important. I mean, it is, quite honestly, English and maths are pretty much essential. You need to do well in them because they're the kind of skills that you need for your other subjects. If your English isn't very good, and if your maths isn't very good, you're going to find it hard to do the science. And I think probably science is still one of these kind of core important subjects. But then what do you get rid of? Do you get rid of drama? Do you get rid of art? Do you get rid of photography? What kind of subjects aren't important? And, I know there's going to be a lot of teachers who'd be very upset if their subject wasn't seen as an essential subject and was cut. The other problem I can see with that, of course, is that if there needs to be more English and more maths happening, who's going to be teaching that? Because the English and maths teachers are already going to be teaching their classes. So if you need to have extra maths classes, who's actually going to be there to teach that? Something which I think could be, especially if you're in year 10 at the moment and you're going to be doing your GCSEs next year, is the option that maybe some students drop some GCSEs altogether in year 11. Now, this kind of happens. I know that when I've done intervention with students, and especially ones in my tutor group, we've seen that there's some students who are just really struggling to pass anything, and that's when they might drop 1 or 2 subjects to concentrate on maybe science and English and maths. The hard thing is if you've got a whole year group doing that, which GCSEs do you drop? I mean, when I was at school, I didn't like GCSE German because I was just really bad at languages. I just found it so hard for me personally. And I'd have happily dropped German to spend more time doing science and maths, which is what I really enjoyed. So maybe this is something where your schools have that conversation with individual students, and maybe you then spend a bit more time doing self-directed study on the subjects which are going to be important for you. Maybe the things that you need to get onto college or the subjects you're thinking about doing at A-level. But again, nothing has been decided at this point, so keep working on all of your GCSE subjects if you're in year 10. It does say as well that A-levels, they're planned to take place next summer, but with some adaptations. At the moment, we don't know what adaptations that might be. I suspect, and this is my own feeling, is that for for A-level physics, the content is going to be exactly the same. They're not going to take out modules because it's so different between exam boards, and all of them are important, to be honest. I think they might look at how they do the practical work. So normally you have required practicals that you have to do a certain amount of. I think with the issues in the science lab about having a whole class doing practical experiments, I think they might look at some of the practical requirements for A-level physics and maybe get out some of these required practicals. But I do think they're going to have the same amount of content, but maybe the exams might be slightly later, so maybe starting in June rather than in May. But again, I don't know, the exam boards don't know, and that's still up for consultation with Ofqual and your teachers. I suppose one good bit of news for your teachers is that there won't be any Ofsted inspections because everybody's going to be flapping and panicking and trying to see whatever happens. So there won't be any Ofsted inspections for your teachers in the autumn term, which I guess is a bit of good news. So basically, we don't know what's going to happen. I know, however, that your teachers are desperate for you to get back to school. They can't wait to teach all of you again. I mean, your teachers have been in school, your teachers have been working full time, doing remote learning, supervising the key worker children, and actually just planning for the next year. But I know that they can't wait to be back in school with you lot and actually teaching classes. But whatever happens, it's got to be better than being at home. Even if you dropped maybe a couple of subjects or maybe had extra English and maths to catch up, that's got to be better than just sat at home on your own trying to do work, because that is quite lonely, it's quite boring, and it's very hard to stay motivated. Anyway, don't forget, if your school does shut down, then you can still ace your GCSE physics or your A-level physics exams. I've got loads over on my website. Don't forget, you can subscribe for free on YouTube. You can see my live streams. Basically, I'm your extra teacher who's going to be kind of saving you if schools are shut down. So yeah, don't forget to subscribe to the stuff that I've done. And also just have a look at some of the other YouTube teachers like Primrose Kitten, Gorilla Physics. Loads of us are out there making material for you to help you as much as possible. So until the next update, all of you stay safe, and I hope whatever happens, it works out for you. Thank you.